Please join me in welcoming Jeff Johnson.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. That was great. It's a real honor and privilege to be here. Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. I want to thank your president and provost, any members of leadership on the faculty and staff that are here, to those that play a role in providing instruction to students here, and those that are members of the student body, to those who are community members, and even some of you that call me friend, to Lottie Dottie and everybody. What's up? I am King Day programs and events are challenging for me, because I think that Martin Luther King Jr., as a figure within the annals of history, is asked to do something that no one else in the history of our country in particular has been asked to do. If you talk about George Washington, he is not asked alone to represent the fathers of this country. If you ask Thomas Jefferson, he is not alone asked to represent those that were a part of the building of infrastructure of politics in this country. If you ask John F. Kennedy, he is not asked to alone represent those who worked within government to change policies of inclusion in this country. But Martin Luther King, unlike almost anyone else in history, is asked to represent an entire generation. For those that marched with him are often not said in his same name. Those that were the strategists that gave way for him to be able to have a strategy that he was the representative of, those names are forgotten. Many of the women that ensured that the movement of civil rights was real didn't have their names included in the history books. And so King is lifted up as not only a giant of his generation, but often the representative of his generation, which is not only historically inaccurate and unfair, but creates a level of lack of sophistication of how we look at the very movement that was one of the most successful in the history of modern times. And what it does, as we begin to ask the very question, do you have the courage to lead? What it does is, for young people, oftentimes it shifts and creates a picture that leadership is not sophisticated, is made up of those that give speeches, is made up of those that are great orators, it is made up of those that have the ability to move us to a state of action through emotion, but does not begin to connect us to the ecosystem of leadership and the ecosystem and strategy that was all around King that allowed him to be who he was. King was not the one that planned the March on Washington, that gave him the stage to be able to give a speech that is listed as one of the most important speeches in the history of oratory. So was there not a Bayard Rustin, then there would not have been an I Have a Dream speech at a March on Washington. Had you not had Ella Baker, you would not have had masses of students all over the country that had a new model of mobilization, that created a framework to give King and those with him a platform to negotiate with those in the White House, not because they were scared of King, but because they were scared of those young people that were mobilizing in communities all over the country. And King was the more reasonable voice that they could engage with, because it was a very aggressive voice that they were afraid of. King was not afraid of that, because he understood that his relationship with Stokely Carmichael and those that were a part of SNCC, even the brother who I have the honor of following at this event. So think about the fact that just a year ago, I can do it. As National Youth Director, he was my chair. And I spent nights with Julian Bond. And anybody that knew Chairman Bond, as we affectionately called him, knew that he was hilarious, but he wasn't nice. And when I first met him, I didn't really realize why. Kwesi and Fume did an unbelievable job of hiring young people like myself at the NAACP. Most of us had not reached our 30th birthday yet, and we're senior staff people. in this nearly, at that time, 100-year-old organization. And Mr. Nfume would tout this young staff, and Chairman Bond would walk around unimpressed. And it didn't dawn on me till I thought about the fact that before he was 30 years old, he had already run a mass movement. He had already been blocked from running for political office in this very state. He had been asked to be vice presidential nominee, all before many of us had ever even entered into the NAACP, and it made sense to me that here was a brother that was looking for young people to not just be passionate and not just be willing to be on the front lines and aggressive, but he wanted young people to be sophisticated enough to create transformation and not just noise. Sophisticated enough to understand that movements are about being able to take people from one place to another, ensuring that their lives will never be the same, and not just enough to make people excited about the potential of what could be. But King is asked to be a representative even as he stands in a memorial on the mall that he never would have wanted. I find it somewhat amusing that there's a $150 million statue to a man that said, "Don't build me a statue," but no corresponding $150 million institute to ensure that the work that he gave his life for continues. So as we ask the question, do you have the courage to lead? Let's begin to be honest about what leadership is. Because in this day and age, we are so consumed by consuming content and being entertained by that content, even when that content is religious or political, that we don't really view leadership through the lens of what transformation do they create. We view leadership through the lens of who makes me feel good about what we don't do.
Right.
Maybe that's not you. I'm sure with all the scientists in the room, you all don't do that. But my problem is that even when we look at the trajectory of Barack Obama, we have to be honest about the fact that many of the people who voted and elected him into office in the first term were less concerned with what the specifics of change were. They were more concerned with the fact that he made them feel good about what change was possible. But the challenge once elected is there were people in this country that actually believed they had elected Jesus. That milk and honey was going to flow, and that all of a sudden that this man was going to use the executive pen to be able to change the face of communities, not understanding that they had elected not even an activist, but a president. If we're going to have the conversation, do we have the courage to lead? We first have to ask ourselves, do we understand what leadership is? And then begin to ask ourselves, do we have the courage to do those things that actually define leadership? What made King so unbelievable to me was that he always seemed like he was willing to be his authentic self in the face of those that did not want him to be authentic. When I think about the leadership of those that were a part of the civil rights movement, it was a badge of honor to be who you were. Nobody talked about having a brand. Nobody needed somebody to be able to help them construct their social media platform. Nobody needed a publicist to be able to make sure that before they got booked on a TV show that their bio went out so they would effectively be able to tell people what all of the things that they had done prior to the point that they did this interview. They understood that my authentic voice is the voice that speaks truth to power, to the issue that's at hand, that the powers that be would understand that there is a sophisticated force of individuals that is coming against you, not just with moral imperative, but with a strategic value proposition that says if we don't change, we don't get better. But what I see so often today is those who are actually afraid to be authentic, because the moment that they're authentic, that might damage their brand. The moment that they actually say something honest, that's going to cut off the pipeline of funding that they get. And so now we have leaders that are nothing more than sound bites that show up at events and regurgitate the stuff that you've already heard, but don't even cast legitimate vision for what's possible for us to complete. King understood that it's not my job to make you comfortable. and you're listening. But I'm hoping that we can operate within the context of tradition, because we are entering into the season of blackness. You do know that. For those of you that don't know, the season of blackness is King Day through the end of Black History Month, where institutions that traditionally don't invite any black people will now have programs and events that all of a sudden make the institution seem like they have an unbelievable focus on providing content that speaks to diasporic people. I'm not saying you do that at Georgia Tech. I'm just saying welcome to the season of blackness. And in the spirit of the season of blackness, I'm hoping that you, for the next 30 minutes, can walk with me through something that we call, in the black tradition, call and response. This is not an academic lecture. I'm not a scientist. Or am I a professor here? That means, for those of you that don't know, if I say something you like, you say, amen. I feel you, dog. That's what's up. Yes, that's acceptable too. If you don't like it, you shout no. You shake your head, you get up and leave, anything. Just don't make me feel like I'm on stage by myself for the next, now 28 minutes. Y'all with me? Amen. See, because when we think about the king that is presented to us in 2015, it's a very different king than was the one who lived amongst us. I love baby boomers so much because they lie so well. There was only 250,000 people at the March on Washington. Everybody's grandmother and big mama and auntie and them be like, I was at the march. See, but it wasn't easy to support King when he was living. Because despite the fact that there were other figures within this ecosystem of social justice that seemed to be scarier than King, King was not easy to follow. Because at rallies where King was, and at churches where there were strategic meetings, your license plate number got written down. And people reported who was at the meeting. And people lost jobs. And people got followed. So all of this, the great communicator and the great connector King, was not how they described King when he was alive and could be threatening. See, we can honor people in death that we vilify in life. And so even as we talk about King in 2015, it's a watered down, rose-colored glasses King that makes people feel comfortable on his national holiday. It's the I Have a Dream speech King and not the message from a Birmingham jail King. It's the I Have a Dream King, but not the drum major instinct King. It's the I Have a Dream King, but it's not his position on the Vietnam War King, because that's the king that got assassinated. And so if we're going to have the courage to lead, we have to be authentic enough to be willing to do and say the things that scare the hell out of people in the name of productive progress. I'm not talking about being provocative for the sake of provocative, because we all realize that while Donald Trump may have his time, that's not ultimately the leadership that most of the country wants. At least some of you. I apologize for those of you that are Donald Trump supporters. But at some point, all of your provocative language should translate into a plan that you have. So even if you hate everything, at some point, we should know what you want to do. But Donald Trump's not alone in this psychosis, because there are so many leaders on both sides of the aisle that have the ability to spew emotional vision disconnected from pragmatic strategy. Are we willing to be our authentic selves? And I think academic communities have more of a challenge than that than anyone else. Why? Because academic institutions are the place where we have been charged to challenge ignorance. But so often it's the place where we're most afraid, because if I invite this speaker, this funder, understand that there are institutional priorities, and at the end of the day, we have to be concerned with institutional advancement that speaks to the strategic plan of the institution, that ensures that 20 years from now, we have been able to make sure that we have a greater presence in the marketplace and are ensuring a greater impact on the global economy. I understand that. But there is a balancing act that we have to have that says that we understand we can create some of the greatest engineers and greatest scientists that America or the world has ever seen, while simultaneously allowing those great scientists and engineers and mathematicians to be critically thinking people that have the ability to analyze, because you allowed them to be subjected to the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was. That's what real institutions of higher education do. And so are we courageous enough to have the conversations that make all of us uncomfortable? See, normally when I say that, ultimately black people say, yeah, because that means that we think that all of a sudden we're going to have conversations to make everybody except us feel uncomfortable. But some of us need to have some real uncomfortable conversations, both in private and in public, about what it means to have a legitimate movement. I'm so excited about Black Lives Matter because it is the most unsophisticated, authentic voice that I've seen in a long time. And you got a whole bunch of people saying, well, why can't you say all lives matter? You have a whole lot of people that say, well, why don't we know what your drawn out strategy for the next 5 years is and what it is that you ultimately want to achieve? Shut up. Because the reality is that these are young people that have been moving against forces that so many people have been sitting on silent, and now you want to question what their strategy is? Now you want to question the narrative that they use? Now you want to question the hashtag that they create? Create your own then. But they're authentic because in a face where it's politically correct to say all lives matter, they're authentic enough to their own vision to say that while all lives matter, all lives are not being shot down at the rate that African Americans are in urban communities. All lives matter. All lives are not being incarcerated at the level that African American lives are being incarcerated. Yes, all lives matter, but there is a systematic attack on urban communities and poor communities, predominantly made up by Black and Latino people, and thus I should have the love for myself to be able to say that I matter. And the fact that we miss that means that we don't understand the humanity behind the movement of them being able to say, I'm not even talking about you. I'm talking about that I matter, that I have value, that so often everywhere I turn that tells me I doesn't, I mean something to me. And when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm screaming from the top of my lungs, I matter. Can you see me? Can you feel me? Can you hear me? Can you understand me? Some of us could learn from Black Lives Matter a level of authenticity as it comes to the things that we care about. So whether it's homelessness of young people in the city of Atlanta, or the fact that still too many young people in Atlanta can't read, and they find themselves surrounded by some of the greatest institutions of higher education that the world has to offer that they can't pay for. How do we navigate the things that we care about with a level of courageousness by being authentic to what it is we believe? The second area that we've got to have courage in if we are going to provide legitimate leadership is, are we prepared to cast out visions that don't make sense? One of the things that makes me troubled about much leadership that I see is that none of it, so much of it, is uninspiring. Not because it's not something that we need, but because at no point does it challenge us to go beyond what's comfortable to create it. See, as an African American man, I come from a legacy of people who fought for freedom they didn't know what it felt like. Something is real gangster when you can fight for something that you can't even conceptualize in reality. I believe that I can be free when my mother wasn't free, when my grandmother wasn't free, when my great-grandmother wasn't free, when I don't know where I came from looks like or what my original name was. I still believe that while I am embroiled in an institution known as slavery, that is all I know. And in fact, in many cases, I'm told to define my reality through this economic institution, but I still say no. That's my problem with the black church. My problem with the black church is not that I bring this up, and it's relevant to this discussion because the black church has been the seminal institution and the foundational institution to help provide leadership and organizational infrastructure for the movement that King represented. So even if you weren't a member of the NAACP, or you weren't a part of SCLC, or you weren't a part of CORE, you were a member of a church. And normally that church had a basement. And in that basement there were meetings. And in those meetings you got instruction for what the movement was going to be. And even if the pastor did not have some overtly political philosophy that he or he preached from the pulpit, they weren't so apolitical that they were afraid to understand or talk about the fact that when we, as people of faith, can use the doctrine that we've been given because we understand that it was here to be able to build something on earth. And that what good is it if I give people spiritual empowerment who can't pay their bills? What good is it if I excite you to a state of euphoric inactivity where you can speak in tongues for 24 hours but can't raise your kids? What good is it if I take your tithe but you can't use your money to empower your own community? My problem with the church in this day and age is that the very institution that served as the foundational institution for a movement that King represented that brought about transformative change is now more concerned with being a business than prophetic. Wow. And that was one of the places where we had divine inspiration. So when we thought of things that didn't make sense, we thought of them through the context that I gotta meet my God somewhere I can't go by myself. Yeah. And so the reason I can believe in freedom when I've never felt it is because I know God never created me to be a slave. See, the black church did not start when the African Methodist Episcopal Church or the Church of God in Christ decided to open doors and create a physical institution known as a denomination. The black church started when slaves got Bibles. Yeah. And let's put that in context. Because I've heard so many people talk about the fact that slaves were unsophisticated, and the reality was that they got duped by slave masters into embracing a Christian theology that made them passive to a ruler that wanted to control them. But that unsophisticated analysis doesn't stand the test when you begin to talk about slaves who all had different original dialects coming together in a place where they had to learn a dialect that was not their own. Thus, they were speaking someone else's dialect. They were given a theology because they did not practice Christianity in whatever tribe they were in on the continent. So they were taking somebody else's theology. But with someone else's theology and someone else's dialect, they were able to create songs that the original owner of the dialect and theology didn't know was about freedom, but they thought it was about conformity. And when you can trick somebody with their own theology and their own dialect, that a song that you're singing that they think is about being docile is about freedom, that's gangster. And what challenges me in 2015 is that church is afraid of their own babies on their block. And that church can't imagine a community without gangs. And that church can't imagine a community without drugs. And that church can't imagine a community where you can't come into this community unless you come through somebody that looks like us to create a business because we're concerned about the economic dollar turning over in this community back to us instead of leaving every time somebody closes down a gate and drives to the suburbs. And if the church has a problem with creating vision that doesn't make sense, what about those of us that have no faith? Can we have the courage to create vision that is so ridiculous that it inspires another generation to move? Because I ain't following nobody with no down the street vision. I can see it. And I walk faster than you. What I need you for? problems that we're dealing with are systemic problems that have plagued our country, our society, our people, for decades, if not centuries. And those aren't things that are going to be solved overnight. And they require vision, check this, that is so revolutionary that its end can't be completed by me. That's when you know you got real leaders. Because fake leaders always see themselves in the equation. Real leaders see transformation in the equation. And your vision has to be so insane that it doesn't have you at the end. What is it that you want to see changed? And what does it look like? What does it make you feel like? What do you want your great-grandchildren to experience that you never have? What do you want those that live in Atlanta to be able to see? What do you want students that walk through these doors to be able to do? What kind of access do you want them to have? What kind of technology do you want them to be able to access? What kind of resources and connectivity do you want them to have? What young people who right now don't have a chance in the world of attending Georgia Tech do you want to see at Georgia Tech in 5 years? Can you create a vision that is so ridiculous that it makes you almost afraid to say it out loud because it almost seems so unrealistic that it's not even possible? That's what the universe is wanting leaders to be able to provide. King, when he talked about I have a dream, talked about stuff that people didn't think would happen in his lifetime. Those in that time recognize that if we don't have dreams and visions that almost seem impossible, why dream them at all? The last thing as we begin to close out, do we have the courage after we've been in this place to be our authentic selves and dream visions that almost don't make sense? Can we be institutionally sophisticated? Because that is what I think we see the greatest challenge in 2015 with the leadership that we're seeing of young people all over the country. There's aggression, there's brilliance, there is focus, there is discipline. But because you're talking about a generation that's been disconnected from institutions for over a generation, very few of them have the institutional knowledge with which to create sophisticated infrastructure that ensures the sustainability of the work that they're doing. That's not their fault. But the question is, where are the people that understand institutional infrastructure and strategy saying to young people, I'm here for you in whatever way you need me, not can I help you turn you into what I think you should be? And I see so many old people getting in the way of youth movements because elders can't find them. Let me be clear, because some of you don't know the difference between old people and elders. Some of you have heard me say this before. Old people are old. They've been here a long time, and most of the time they're in the way. Let me say it again for the old people in the room. Old people are old. They've been here a long time, and most of the time, they're in the way. Elders are those that understand that their time on this earth is not just for the benefit of themselves, but that even as they have been able to do amazing things, that it's their job to put their hands on the generation that comes after them, that generation would not be destined to repeat the mistakes of the previous. Old people are afraid of young leadership. Elders have been praying for it. Old people think you taking their stuff. Elders know they've been working for you to show up. Old people believe that you make them irrelevant. Elders understand you're the only thing that makes them relevant. Young leadership has to understand institutional infrastructure and strategy enough to know the difference between old people and elders. And the elders, it's time to embrace them, pull them into your private meetings. Allow them to provide you with the wisdom that you will never have. Even the Bible says, I call the old because they know the way, but I call the young because they're strong. Because God understood that the strength of young people has to be paired with the wisdom of elders in order for it to be productive. But when young people are disconnected from elders, you got all energy, passion, gangster vision, but no wisdom to protect you from your own gangster. Elders disconnected from young people are lacking the energy that keeps them alive. We got elders dying on the vine because they can't connect with the young people that they were created to be able to serve. And so when we begin to create sophisticated infrastructure and institutional infrastructure, especially within the context of civil rights and social justice movement, and I say that because when we begin to look around the country, the reason why the Dream Defenders, or the reason why Black Lives Matter, whatever sect it is, have become so popular and are so quoted and are being asked to come on and interview is because often the NAACP, the Urban League, and the Black Church are so irrelevant that news people don't even know who they are to call on them to provide information on what they don't do anything with. So it's not to say that the NAACP, the Urban League, and the Black Church should be thrown away. It's to say if they're going to be effective in 2015, that there has to be an infusion of an elevated strategy and infrastructure that is relevant to 2015. Nobody, it's like we're the British in the French-Indian War, lining up, getting picked off, because we keep wanting to do things a way that they doesn't work anymore. And then call it righteous because it's what they did. And that's why we keep hearing the I have a dream speech over and 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 over again. If I could pass a law, I would pass a law that said only young people under the age of 5 who have never heard the I have a dream speech can hear the I have a dream speech. Because the I have a dream speech is used to manipulate emotions by leaders that don't have current day vision. Because what in the world would make you think if King was living in 2015 that he'd still be dreaming a 1960s dream? For real? King was constantly evolving. He wasn't even talking about the I have a dream speech when he got shot. He was talking about a poor people's campaign. He was talking about a war in Vietnam. He was beginning to engage on a human rights level because he understood that civil rights was important, but human rights included civil rights. And that if he was able to speak to the humanity of people, no matter what they looked like, attacking and challenging the powers that be to deliver on what they promised they would deliver, that transformative change would be what America needed to become her best self. And so are we willing to create the kind of infrastructure that just wants to regurgitate stuff so that you can make people feel good about what we don't do? Are we clear about developing institutional infrastructure that creates strategy and a sophisticated chessboard? Because when you create the chessboard, then everybody doesn't believe they have to be like King. Because then there can be writers that are part of the movement. There can be scientists that are part of the movement. There can be funders that are businessmen that don't march in rallies but write checks so that those who have organizations can move. There are those who would be thought leaders, and there are those that would be journalists, and those that would build institutional infrastructure, as well as those that would sing songs and write prose for the movement, as well as those that would create content, as well as young people that would understand that being a part of movement isn't dressing like somebody or walking like somebody. It's living with a level of character and using my God-given gift with every opportunity to be able to change the environment I come in for no other reason than because I was made so brilliant by God that all I have to do is show up with authenticity and the room will change. That's who King was. But more than that, that's who the nameless, faceless men and women who strategized, who built, who created, that when King showed up, there was a movement. It was those that trained so that when King showed up, there were troops. It was those who created content so that when King spoke, it could be reverberated around the world in the way that they intended and not the way somebody else intended. There was an ecosystem, a chessboard of leaders. And King just knew he was the spokesperson. And he did his job with brilliance because he was inspired by others around him who were brilliant. As I take my seat, my question for you, beyond do you have the courage to lead, is how will you lead? Who will you touch? What will you transform? Because I don't mildly care if you like my speech. Y'all paid me. I don't go to school here. I'm not called with determining what Georgia Tech will be in 6 months, what the Atlanta community will be in 2 years. But you are. Because every single breath you take in this environment requires that you give something back. It doesn't mean you give it back the way King did. It means you find your place on the chessboard. See, I just want y'all to be like Tyrone. Somebody's supposed to say, who's Tyrone? Tyrone was this little kid from Baltimore who used to visit his grandmother in Natchez, Mississippi every summer. And anybody that knows Natchez, Mississippi knows this small town outside of a small town. And he'd go down, and once a week his grandmother would go to the store to get what she needed to cook and to clean. And they walk into the store, and the store owner, Mr. Smith, says, "Tyrone, it's good to see you, man. Come back here and grab a handful of candy." And Tyrone, with this West Baltimore swag, looks at him. "Man, I don't know you. That's your job. You get it." His grandmother, Miss Johnson, grabs him by the elbow and pulls him to the side and said, "Boy, what in the world is the matter with you? We've taught you better than that. And as you begin to grow up, you need to use your own hands to get what you want." Tyrone looked at his grandmother as seriously as a 6-year-old can look at an 82-year-old. So she's a real grandmother. She was a real big mama. He said, "Big mama, his hands are bigger than my hands. So if he puts his hand in the candy dish, I get more candy." See, this is all about whose hands it's in. In my hands, a football is worth about $45. But in the hands of Alabama, it was worth an NCAA championship because it's all about whose hands it's in. In my hands, a basketball is worth about $35, but in the hands of a team this year, it's going to be worth an NBA championship because it's all about whose hands it's in. In my hands, a tennis racket is worth $100, but in the hands of Serena Williams, she has taken it to the world of tennis in a way that nobody ever has before because it's all about whose hands it's in. In my hands, a golf club. It's not good. But in the hands of Tiger Woods, it showed folks that black men could play any sport created because it's all about whose hands it's in. In my hands, a pencil is what I use to write my notes for the week, but in the hands of Langston Hughes, it wrote prose that said, "I too am America. I'm the darker brother. They send me to the kitchen when company comes, but I just laugh and eat well and grow strong because one day I'll sit at the table when company comes and they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed." In my hands, a book is what I use to get empowerment, but in the hands of those of Ida B. Wells and Sheikh Anta Diop and others, it wrote political theory that changed what the world believed was possible. What will you do with your hands? Do you have the courage to be your authentic self, to build a reality that is nobody else's but yours? Do you have the courage to take those hands to create vision that's so audacious that people, when they begin to follow you, don't even believe it's possible? Do you have the courage to be able to build infrastructure, institution that can last beyond your lifetime? Or will you sit on your hands, comfortable with your privilege, unwilling to make change because you're too afraid to fail? King understood, as did everyone else around him, that the true measure of a man is not where we are during times of comfort and convenience, but where are we when it counts? And our country is in that place right now. What will you do with your hands?
Pretend that I can say anything that will even remotely reflect what we just experienced here. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much for those words, that inspiration. We are a better community for your presence here. So, Jeff has agreed to entertain several questions from the audience. And so I'm going to move to the side and allow you to designate. There are mics in the middle of the aisles. So if any of you think you might have a question, go to the mic. And then, not all of you at once, of course. And we'll have some questions, Q&A sessions.
Hi, my name is Nigel Campbell. I am a fourth-year computer science major, graduating in fall 2016. My question, I guess my question to you is in the face of political, social, and financial adversity, how do you sort of maintain authenticity? I guess in the media, just is this how you? I won't follow you, but is this how you speak normally?
It's a good question, Paul. And I think that the challenge for a lot of us in the media is that we get invited into entertainment to be someone else. My trajectory was different because I was National Youth Director of the NAACP. I never wanted to be on TV. I had no desire to be on TV. I was in New York. I'd left the NAACP and I was broke, and I was trying to build a consulting company. And I knew Russell Simmons. And so I figured if I can't find business in Russell's office. Right. No, for real, right? If you're in Russell Simmons' office, everybody from the janitor to the Dalai Lama is rolling through that piece on a daily basis. And if you don't use that access to be able to engage people, then you're crazy. So that was what I was doing. And in the midst, I had lunch with a friend who said, Stephen Hill, who was at BET, who is still at BET, and I talked about you, you should reach out to him. And first thing I thought of is, this is a dude who will pay for lunch. What you do when you're broke and you're trying to get business. So he could have said anything. I was going for lunch. So I reached out to Steve and I said, hey man, when are you free for lunch? He said, meet me at my office. I came to his office, I walked in, and the first thing he said is, hey man, you want to be on TV? And I'm like, I don't know. This is BET. All TV ain't good TV. So what you saying? He said, I love your energy. I think you'd be good for the demographic. I want you to be on 106 in Park or Rap City, but I don't know how. So, check. I never even thought about this like this until you asked me the question. We oftentimes have to be our most authentic self when we're accepting an offer. Yeah. And so this dude was just giving me the keys to a kingdom. I knew cats that would shoot somebody to be on TV. And at that time, AJ and Free were on 106. It was the most popular show on the network. And I was like, I can't do 106. Because they yelling all the time. From the time they come on to the time they go off, they yelling. And like, that's not me, man. I can't do that. I said, me and Tigger can do something. I can come on. We can do the same way Tavis and Tom Joyner do it. I come on once a week, talk about something. We'll finish up. We'll go. He was like, bet. I love it. You're going to be Tigger's cousin. We're going to call you Cousin Jeff. I was like, Cousin Jeff? Man, this is already BET. That sounded a little Bama for me. I don't know if I can navigate Cousin Jeff. He said, trust me, it's going to work. I asked him, I said, will you censor me? He said, no. And I tested him. Every opportunity I could, he'd be taping. And I'm waiting for them to say, cut. You can't say that. To their credit, they knew what they were asking me to come do. And they never asked me to be anybody but myself. I think the challenge for us is that oftentimes we are given, whether we're going into corporate America or whether we're going into entertainment, we are offered things that is asking us to be someone else. Right. And often don't have the courage to negotiate the stuff that are non-negotiable for us. So in the midst of that, I think you have to go in with a level of integrity to say, this is who I am, this is what I'll accept, this is what I won't accept, and have the courage to turn down stuff you wish you could take. Now, there are some things where you're going to have to compromise. And the question is, do you know in your own mind what you're willing to compromise and what you're not? I've been in places that I didn't like, but they didn't ask me to compromise more of myself than was necessary. And as I've been able to build my own company, now I don't have to work with people I don't like. No, I'm serious. And by that I mean, I don't mean we don't have personality conflicts. I mean that I don't believe in taking on clients where I can't sleep at night. And there's a lot of money to be made from people you work with that will keep you up. I just don't want to do that. And I have friends that are millionaires because they do. And I don't judge them for that. I know that's not my call. So as a young person coming up, I think you have to be really clear about what you want. I think you have to be really clear about who you are. I think you have to constantly do the introspection to check that. Not only when you're taking in opportunities, but when you're in the midst of them. And then I think you have to say, what is the world that I ultimately want to create? And believe that that doesn't have to exist separate from my career. I just think so often we've been taught that my career and my purpose have to be separate. Some of you were created to be the most unbelievable scientist that the world has ever seen. Some of you have been created. Like, I believe you were given life that you would take the technology, information that you have and the engineering tools that you've been given to build stuff that nobody else could build to make society better and get paid. Yeah. And I just don't believe you have to separate the two. I just think you have to know yourself well enough to be able to say, here's the impact I want to make, and here's how much I want to make. How do I find where those things intersect? And as a young person, normally there's some steps that you have to take to be able to get there, but the world often tells you got to decide. And I don't believe you do. I just believe it takes more work and more commitment, and sometimes longer, to be able to get there. Did I answer your question with all that?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the question. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Miss USA pageant. So don't take my crown and give it to someone else.
Nobody can take your crown.
I know. First of all, thank you so much. I apologize. I came in late, but I think my timing was perfect because you were talking about the I Have a Dream speech. And what you shared was how I feel about the speech, that oftentimes I feel that it's thrown, I don't want to say thrown in our face, but it's used over and over sort of to subdue people. And I would like if you could just talk more about how that speech is used, and expound a bit more on your comment.
Sure, and let me say, to be fair, that I think that I acknowledge the fact that it literally is one of the most profound speeches in the history of modern oratory.
Agreed.
And when we talk about it within its proper historical context, I think it's fantastic. We talk about where King was, what the time was, what the March on Washington meant, why that speech was important to the March on Washington, and even how King pivoted as he came out of that march to understand that what he wanted to do was larger than just civil rights. That's when I love it. My problem is when we play it in 2015 as if it's a rallying cry for mobilization now. It's the same way I hate when civil rights organizations end events with "We shall overcome." For real? Can we sing something else? Can you get John Legend to make you a song for you? Sing the Selma song, something. But we have to understand that music and art is so relevant because artists make things for that time. And what's happening in that space and time inspires them to be able to create a piece of music or create or write a song or create a film in that moment. And in that moment, it's relevant. There is nothing relevant to me in 2015, 2016 about "We Shall Overcome." It reminds me of what we didn't do. And I want to sing a song about where we're going now. I want to sing a song about black people owning nanotech companies. That's what I want to sing a song about. I want to sing, I'm laughing, I'm serious. I want to sing songs about the infrastructure we're building to be able to control our own communities. I want to sing songs about elected officials that understand what ecosystem mapping is so they can do sophisticated problem solving instead of going to the same old people that already don't know how to fix the stuff that they broke. Right? So that's how I feel about it. But more importantly, I think that art should inspire the now. And that if we allow art to exist, I don't have a problem hearing "We Shall Overcome" when I'm watching Eyes on the Prize. It's within its proper historical context. And I understand what it meant to those people that were holding hands in that moment. Because in that moment, they had not experienced what we have. I almost feel like singing that stuff and doing those speeches is an affront to them. Because you know how much we've overcome? Do you know how far we've come? Do you realize that as black people, we have $1 trillion of spending power when we have been out of slavery less than half the time we were in it?
Right on.
We have $1 trillion of buying power when we have been out of slavery half the time we were in a 400-year institution that disconnected us from power. If that doesn't say that we've come a long way, even as we have greater vision of where we need to go, and it's obviously not just an economic statement that's important, but who we are as a people, where we've come from, what we've been able to build, the legacy that we've been able to give our children, what they've been able to see us do. My daughter is 16, and she has a little baking business, and she goes to a huge church, so she knows how to sell to the people at the church. She makes more than me. And she came to me with an idea, and it was cool. She wanted to create an app just to sell to the people at the church, and then integrate the app into the system that the church was using to be able to do tithes and offerings and announcements. Great. But when she told me about it, I said, "Madison, that's cool." And she said, "Dad, you don't seem super excited about that." And I said, "I'm not." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Look, baby, I think it's a good idea, and I'm proud of you for coming up with it. But me being proud of you and me being excited are two different things. And I'm not going to be excited until you come to me and tell me something that I need to ask you 20 minutes worth of questions to explain it to me, because I don't get it. Because I have given you a life that I didn't have. Because my father gave me something that he never experienced because his grandfather." I was in Columbus, Georgia, maybe 6 months ago. And I was invited to do a speech, and I didn't tell them anything about my history with Columbus, Georgia. And the mayor comes up, and she gives me a key to the city and names whatever day Jeff Johnson Day. And I know that stuff is pomp and circumstance, and within the confines of city, they do that stuff all the time. But they didn't know that both my grandparents on my father's side were born in Columbus, Georgia. And they had to leave Columbus, Georgia in the 1950s to move to Cleveland to work in the Ford plants because my grandfather couldn't make a good enough living to take care of his 5 children. And so fast forward almost 80 years, and I'm going back to receive a key to a city that my grandparents couldn't make a living in. And if I can acknowledge what my ancestors have done for me and what they've allowed me to see, you ain't going to excite me because you tell me something I can see. You need to be standing on my shoulders looking at stuff that I can't see and inspiring even me. And that's why I don't like it. Because it doesn't inspire me to new vision. All it does is remind me of the past.
Thank you so much. Identify myself. I'm Deshawn Jenkins. I'm Managing Director of Africa Atlanta and the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. And I'm under the direction of Jacqueline Royster, who is Dean of the Ivan Allen College. So I had to state it because those are some really transformative initiatives that are going on at Georgia Tech, and songs and stories will be written about those. Thank you.